Hey everyone. We are going to get started in just a second. When Ryan joined, I was like, one, thank you for being one of our favorite speakers that we have brought back probably more than most, maybe the most. We'll see. I should do the actual math. But I just think the work that you all do is really fantastic. So as we have a very short intro, and most people probably know this, but you're an engineer and investor focused on solving systemic societal challenges. Right now, you're at Kleiner Perkins, worked with John Doerr, have written the book Speed and Scale with him, and really championed the fact and idea that we need to work at both a pace and a scale that maybe we've never done before, right? And maybe there's sort of comparables that we can talk about. But that's the high level. And then Ryan, I know that you have some sort of grounding,
Ah,
high level things that we can talk about, and I'll give you a share screen if that's helpful. Um, but then we'll just kind of go straight into questions, and a lot of my questions are going to be around this moment too, right? And like what has changed, if anything. And then of course, we will also go to audience Q&A. So please just keep dropping questions throughout as you have them. But first, Ryan, thanks for joining us and being one of our faves.
of course. Thank you for having me. I mean, this group has been wonderful. I'm remembering last time where I think we did not have enough time for like Q&A and the fireside side. So I'm going to probably move a little quicker, Candice, this time call it the ground setting because I think everybody here probably is grounded on the challenge that we're facing. But let me share a few slides, and the slides are really actually just links because I think that's probably the most helpful way to orient you to call it the world that I spend my time in and my team does. Speed and Scale is a started out as a book, right? I mean, it really actually started out as a plan that we were trying to use ourselves internally. And if folks know John Doerr, he loves OKRs. And so it was like, well, what if we take all the climate work we're doing and try to take a step back for a second and say, well, if you made an OKR to the climate crisis, what would it look like? And so Speed and Scale takes you through that. How do you go from 59 billion tons of emissions down to zero? When it was meant to be just an internal thing for us in a Google Sheet, we would share it with folks. And it was during the pandemic, right? 2020, early March, April. And so all of our meetings that we would kind of share our OKRs with experts and folks were on Zooms. And so we would hit record. And then very quickly by the middle to the end of that year, we're like, oh, shoot, this whole library of Zoom interviews, these inspiring leaders from, call it policymakers, entrepreneurs, founders, investors. We just can't keep that stuff to ourselves. And so the book really was born from that, Canvas, like the incredible stories we were seeing, what was happening on the ground. And that was 2021. And so I will save it for the question that you have of what has changed. I'm going to put a pause for that because I know you're going to ask me that. But in 2021, the book first came out, and then we had the OKRs and we had a poster, if folks remember, but it really captured what we had to do to get to zero, right? Electrify transportation, decarb the grid, fix food, protect nature, clean up industry, and remove carbon. And then the way that we approach things, though, is like we got to get there by 2050, right? We got to get as close as to zero as possible by then. And so you've got to win the policy and politics, turn movements into action, innovate, and invest, right? If we pull on those things, the getting to zero would happen faster. Accompanied with it is, the key results, right? Or objective if it's to electrify transportation, what measures are we going to track to say that we're getting there? Over the course of 2022 and 3 and 4, we as a team did a lot of work to start tracking the KRs because if you remember and you have a vintage early poster from our work, we didn't actually rate where we were because we didn't have the data. And it took us perhaps as much as time to write the book to go find the data sources and really pull them all out. And then so updated poster, great. But then to the question that you have, well, what has changed? And so if you go to the Speed and Scale website, you can see a progress report from last year, April 2024, that takes you through each section, what's changed, what are the bright spots. But because we're doing this call at the start of 2025, Candice, I'll share some nuggets that are different from 2024 to today. And if you go to speedandscale.com as well, too, you can see an action guide as well for folks of what you can do, what your office can do, and so forth. And so for us, it's been this resource that we put out there because it helps us in our thinking. We've got a few more kind of exciting projects that are happening this year that we'll definitely share with the Climate Vine community. And I'll stop there.
So, fantastic. So, 2021, you guys talked to a ton of people, which then created this book. 2023 to 2024, you're like, great, we have OKRs. Part of this process is we have to measure, right? Where are we and where do we need to go? And then you're continually updating that, creating new projects. Jonathan, I think, is on his iPhone, but he's,
Yeah.
yeah, always talking about the new projects, which is great. And I don't think I've heard the latest, and would love to share whatever you all can share. Um, so we spent some time in our previous talks talking about like where are we lagging and where are we almost ahead. Can
Yeah.
we do like a couple minutes, let's say on your, and you can do top of mind or you can show us, where to find these things as well, but like two places where we're lagging and you're like, I wish more people, let's actually start with two places where we're winning, right? Where you're like,
Good, good.
we're
Positivity
doing
first.
really
Yeah,
well
that's
here.
always.
Exactly. We're doing really well
Yeah.
here. Um, if you want to pile on here, great. But and maybe this isn't the right framing, but
Yeah.
maybe if you want to focus on something that's maybe a bit more underserved, there's less focus on it, and you can maybe make an outsized impact. Here are two
Mm,
places where we're lagging. And maybe that's not the right framing, but
yeah.
let's just start with two places where we're doing really well and two places where we're lagging.
Um, so the way that I'm going to answer this question is like talk about it as a globe, right? Because I think maybe
Cool.
we could spend time. I think actually, is the community on Climate Vine, is it predominantly US, Europe? Do we have folks from Asia and other
Both.
countries, or is both? It's all of the
It
above.
is predominantly US Europe,
Okay,
but I like the lens of the global side. And I did have a question about policy at the
great.
city, state level, US level, but then international level as well. And so we'll
Amazing.
definitely get there.
Okay, good. Then, because I feel like there's like this is one of the most turbulent years ever in a lot of ways, but let's maybe zoom out again to just see the world and what's good.
Mhm.
I would say the best news in climate is cars, is electric vehicles, is the 2 to 3 wheel revolution that's actually happening in the developing world. When you go back to 2019, when we first started to cut the data for the book, it was like 3% of new car sales were electric vehicles. And then by the end of 2024, it was like over 20%. And so
Mhm.
like that is like a monstrous amount of change. And I would say if you pick up the book really talks a lot about, Tesla and GM and a lot of American manufacturers. We do talk about BYD, but we talk about BYD just as buses. And so what's
Mhm.
changed since then is in the past 4 or 5 years, you have BYD, Xiaomi, and a handful of humongous Chinese um,
Yeah.
electric vehicle manufacturers that are just now producing more cars than Tesla is and others. And so call it the revolution has been unwoken. If Tesla was the spark that lit the fuse, China is really the TNT that's coming to the stage. I think what's fascinating about this is that it's changing, call it all of the world's dynamics. And so on the positive side, Candice, it's like EVs are the best news in climate because it is actually gonna be the thing that pulls down our oil and gas, sorry, our oil use and gasoline and
Mhm.
diesel use. But I think it also is creating this whole global challenge as well of like, well, shoot, that's right. Like America, we've got an incredible auto industry. Same with Europe and
Yeah.
others. And you have this company that has a $11,000 electric vehicle, the BYD Song, and it's like really shaking up, call it the world in that
Hmm.
way. And so I think how everyone reacts to it is going to be really important. I think one thing too, like call it a positive note, is that this transition to electric vehicles is happening not because it's the clean, green, climate-oriented thing, right? Like the
Yeah.
why I think we're all here. It's because it's a faster, cheaper, better, more performant. I can plug it into my like the reason why people are switching to it is for all the other benefits. Sorry, I should say, I said climate and sorry, cleaner and greener. No, they're not picking it because it's green, but they're actually picking it because it's cleaner, right? Like it's actually creating
Yeah.
better quality and stuff like that.
Hmm.
The other big kind of incredible piece of good news that's here is just the pace of how much solar, wind, lithium ion batteries, and heat pumps just keep going down that cost curve, right? They used to be very incredibly expensive things. And because we produce so much more of them today, they are truly, truly getting to this place where they're incredibly affordable and bankable. when you look at one of our key results that talks about project financing, right? Like this is
Yeah.
banks, humongous banks that say, I will finance a project if it makes money. The amount of solar, wind, storage projects are like going to near that, call it $1 trillion crossing mark this year. And so it's like that's exciting. That means like the clean green thing is actually the call it the profitable thing. John Doerr has this saying where it's like when the right thing becomes the profitable thing, it'll be the probable thing. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like in this cultural moment, I think the fundamentals of these technologies and the businesses and how they get to the markets are going to be really important. So,
Mm-hmm.
good news, cars. Good news is the sheer drop of costs on renewables. There's like a report that came out just today or yesterday talking about how much every country, like I think the world added some 585 gigawatts of
Mm-hmm.
solar renewable power. And it's like, wow, like the numbers we're getting to are astronomically high.
Mm-hmm.
So to the parts of the bad news.
Well, that's so
Yeah.
so that was fantastic. So we've got EV manufacturers, we have China stepping in, and I think that'll step into the policy framework that I'm gonna go to after this. Again, ask questions because I feel like I mean I have a million questions based on or just comments and questions based on what you just said. So if you're in the audience and you have questions, just drop them throughout and we'll get to them. It reminds me of a question that we'll go into is China, right? And like you
Yeah.
said something about how everyone reacts to this. I want to dig into that a little bit more. And that's just a little bit of like the global, macroeconomic, political sort of space that we're in. The other thing that it reminded me of is this report. You don't have to look at it, Ryan, but just sharing for others
Oh, yeah.
around the neutral order, right? The Carlyle Group, which
Yes.
essentially argued that we have made the transition that we've made so far less because of climate goals, right? But more because of security and trying to have assets that we can control and we can own, right? And so I think that sort of framing, especially with the current administration, again, I'm sure that we can go into it, but but I think it's at first I was like, oh, like profit, whatever, we care about climate. And I think just given the system that we're in, like playing with profitability, are things actually better? And do they align with our security measures? Might make it so that we have a more compelling argument that people just buy into, regardless of the
Yeah.
climate things that are happening. But go ahead.
I mean, this, like, think Jonathan actually on the team shared the Carlisle report, and I was like clicking through it. I was like, this report is spicy. I
Yeah.
was like, this is like putting pieces together that are really important to like zoom in on, which is countries are willing to pay a security premium far higher than any green premium.
Yes.
Like the green premium is like, the goodness of our heart, like all the war money that went to the IRA. Like it's like you're trying your best to do the right thing.
Hmm.
Whereas like the security premium, right? Like that, this kind of, the PDF piece that Carlisle put out was like really making the argument that that's actually the thing that accelerates things even faster. And I think like without a doubt that's like it kind of adds up. I think the other nugget in that report that I found fascinating was just oh, what was it? It was like one little sentence that I was like, wow, this is let me quickly find it because I remember looking at it. Ah, here we go. Um two sentences. The first one was like a pot, like to the point of the good news. It goes, the green premium has already faded, and the market is now in search of a security premium. It's like this is like it's
Mm,
is of course it's clean, green, and cheap, but it's like the security premium is there. But then this one here is, I think, changing, call it the whole world landscape. It said because the United States is now energy independent, it's not safe for other countries to be energy dependent.
yeah.
And you think about when the Ukraine-Russia crisis happened and it cut off natural gas supplies, and then it really made all those costs go up in the developed world. The developing
Mhm.
world really choked off their resources to fossil fuels. And so when you think about
Yeah.
how much you import now, um, like there was always a good case for renewables, being able to take advantage of the sun and the wind and all the good stuff. But here it's
Mhm.
like everyone lived through the moment where you're like, oh yeah, that really cheap fossil fuel price doesn't get cheap sometimes. And it is
Yeah.
volatile, and you got to do something about it. And so I think what you're going to see from this moment is every country that is a net importer, you're gonna like see more call it aggressive actions to try to fix that. Like just a couple of weeks, maybe 2 weeks ago, India put out in Delhi 100% or like a 95% new EV vehicle target by 2029 or
Yeah.
something like that, like in the next few years. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, that's more aggressive than our policies here. And you click into like
Mm-hmm.
India, how much they import. It's like, oh, they import more than like 80% of their oil. They're like, so there's like a security imperative there. And there's also
Right.
probably a clean air imperative as well too. But when those collide, like when all these imperatives collide, really good things happen.
Yeah, and like IRA was this sort of industrial policy thing that was going to bring back jobs and manufacturing to the US. And then I don't know how much of that really was based on climate versus industry. And I think it was argued in different ways to different people. But then I don't know a ton about Indian politics, and this might be, excuse us if this is totally off, but my understanding is they have a very right-wing sort of person in power right now, and that this EV play probably isn't because they care a ton about climate, but because it's security. And what I thought was fascinating was maybe it's all been about things that weren't climate, and maybe that's okay to accept, right? And maybe we can actually use that to some sort of advantage. In the same way that, we're going to have to build a ton of green uh infrastructure, a ton of infrastructure for
Yeah.
hyperscalers, right? Like, is there a world where we can make that green and actually use that to an advantage? Maybe natural gas might win, but anyway, I'm getting off
No,
topic, but this has been, yeah.
but I think that thread is a really important one in this moment. It's like, call it climate and emissions is a lot of the why a lot of us are doing this work and prioritizing it over, call it other ventures that we could go pursue. And so like we deeply all know why we're doing this work, but then call it the what, like what you just
Yeah.
described. Like, is it something that is makes me more energy dependent? Does it bring me manufacturing back home? Is it the more
Hmm.
profitable thing? Those are the things that ultimately will help call it this transition win because when you look at that 59 billion tons of emissions, we also have to acknowledge that's someone's business model, right? Each ton of emissions over there is someone else making money in a different way.
Yeah.
They're selling you natural gas, they're selling you a car that uses combustion, a combustion engine. And so like call it almost this like seeing through like really we're kind of being grounded in this time of what really matters. It's like if you want to displace something over here, you have to build something, to quote Tom Steyer's book, better, faster, and cheaper.
Mhm.
And that's how you win.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we talked about where we're winning actually.
Yes.
And let's talk about where we're behind, where we're lagging,
Yeah,
where you wish more people were focused. And those might be separate things, but just call out which thread you're pulling on with those
totally.
questions.
So the places where we're behind is so while energy, which is humongous, the grid is a humongous portion, and cars as well too of emissions. There's like the really good momentum happening there. When you
Hmm.
look at things like industry, specifically cement and steel, it is still a space and place where it's just like you're nibbling at 0.001% of the emissions, right? Like a dent has
Hmm.
not been made there. You can see the
Right.
dent being made in the other sectors, but these ones are so hard because they
Hmm.
are incredibly heat intensive, but also just using the process of cement to make it and what's been approved, the so-called Portland cement formula to
Hmm.
change that. That's going to take 20, 30 years, right? And so
Hmm.
I'm not like saying that sorry, it's also an obvious thing to say we're lagging there because these are some of the technologies that we need to invest in today, research more and scale up. And so it's like, can we then find ways to deploy them in 2030 and 40? But an
Hmm.
area where I think there was lots of momentum very from the venture market and then in the public markets was food.
Hmm.
Uh, the movement around alternative proteins like really captured the world's
Yeah.
attention. You saw Beyond Meat, you saw Impossible Burgers everywhere. You just saw all of this change. And I think one thing that we all go through is that you get excited about something and then you see how it actually does. And when you look at the data, a couple of data points. The first is like, huh, this is interesting. Like people aren't gravitating to those kinds of things as
Hmm.
much and as fast as people expected. And then the other piece is there was like this survey done that was that 12% of Americans eat more than half the beef,
Hmm.
right? So
Wow.
it's in America. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Wow. That's like an amazing
yeah.
amount of beef.
Yeah. 12% of Americans eat more than half the beef, and it tends to be men of the ages 40 and 65. So, like, that's that, like, it's like this thing, and you're like, oh, was the solution we're creating not actually going after the problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, grill masters, exactly. And the thing is to get into that category, by the way, of eating, more than half the beef, it's like having like beef 3 times a week or something like that. So it's like not even a lot in some senses,
Mm,
but it is a lot. And so what do you take away from that? Well, it means that to tackle this problem of emissions from cows is like you really need to find a way to make cows burp less. And so there's this,
yeah.
whole set of investments around
Hmm.
seed and others. You need to find ways to manage that better. And then you need to find a way to convince that grill master that they should probably put, chicken on the stove, but shrimp on the, on the grill. Like there's like
Hmm.
I think there's this feeling at Speed and Scale where it's like there's no one's going to gravitate to the go vegan message, but maybe they
Yeah.
gravitate to the um pick a different protein. Just eat less beef. Like just doing that change if you're in the big category can do so much. The other area on food that was really sad to see in the data, and it consistently even happened last year, was food waste. We
Hmm.
still in the United States, and if you pick on a country in the developing world, waste 40% of our food. And for
Hmm.
us on this call, it happens mostly when we're at home and
Mm.
at restaurants and places where we just don't eat the food. Whereas places where they spoil in your fridge and things like that, like and you're throwing away. Whereas in the developing world, it's about storage and getting it to, call it, the markets and stuff like that. And so that's a lot, right?
Hmm.
I just started Vaclav Smil's new book on food, and it's like the first thing he kind
Mm.
of hits you at that front. He's like, the world is wasting 40% of its food. And you're telling me
Yeah.
we can beat it? Like there's something kind of missing there. And so food is an area where we're lagging. And then maybe two quick points, like on areas
Yeah.
where it's like there's excitement, but you do have to look at the data and say, what does it mean for this year ahead? One of them is carbon removal, where when you
Mm.
look at the numbers of how much we need, we're still not removing as
Yeah.
much as we need. And especially we're not catalyzing enough to ensure that these industries get as big as they need to be in 10 years plus. But it's such an exciting space. You see all the companies, you see things like Frontier. And so I would say with all the excitement in carbon removal, the message here is like, companies, countries need to start buying more of it. So it really catalyzes
Hmm.
that market. The challenge is it's a voluntary market, Candice. So it's
Yeah.
like that's the piece.
Yeah.
And then venture capital dollars, right?
Hmm.
Because that's an area where right in 21 it was like above 50 billion invested. We're like, oh my
Hmm.
God, that's the key result. This is incredible. 22 above, like, oh my God, this is great. 23, you're like, oh, it's above 50, but it's starting to go down. And then
Yeah.
last year's numbers, I think, are going to be something in the order of like 30 to 40 billion
Mm.
invested last year in climate. And it's like, ooh, this is like a call it another one of those reality check moments where it's like, the excitement and exuberance like is now shifting to more of the tactical and delivery and hitting your milestones and stretching that capital. And this is kind of going to be the moment, I think, Candice, where you're going to see what often happens in call it broader tech, where it's like you'll see
Yeah.
companies start to combine and join
Hmm.
forces. You'll start to see hopefully acqui-hires of great talent going towards the ventures that are able to raise the capital and money. But I'll say this is these next few years are going to be the hardest because it's these companies going out and raising their Series Bs, Cs, and Ds, really trying to prove that they can create a technology that can be financed from a bank. But like the
Hmm.
only way to get there is you have to prove you can kind of lower the costs and that customers want it. And so just being really clear-eyed in the year ahead is going to be important.
How do you, a lot of questions, but my first one is how do you balance the need for speed and scale, which we
Mhm.
all know and we all agree with the fact that uh there's an argument to be made to not try to get the beef eaters to be vegan, right? To actually get them to chicken or sort of the reducing harm versus the meeting our goals.
Yeah.
Or you know what I mean? Like what's that tension that you play with and what's the mental model that you have around some of those decisions?
I think one of it is it's like, does it pass the test of if any of these call it actions or technologies or solutions, like does it pass the test of you going to call it your family and
Mm,
back for
mm,
Thanksgiving, like the stereotypical Thanksgiving dinner where you just
yeah.
have folks from all across the country or all from different places and you're just like, would you do this? Like, would you do X? And like do you want a faster, better car? I mean, like, sure. Like, do you want energy that's more resilient and, can, store in a battery in your home because you're like, yeah, of course.
Hmm.
I think folks might remember it. It's like, but would you like eat a burger that's like, that's not meat? And people are like, well, we all did in this
Yeah.
circle, but I'd put
Yeah.
us maybe a few of us, but not all of us are in that 12% category of like eating, half the beef. And so
Hmm.
I think we just need to have the gut check, like, is the solution that we're trying to put forth really a better one? Does it give someone a
Hmm.
more happy, vibrant, forward-looking kind of life? And is it good for their families? I think that's also the challenge on food is that you
Yeah.
look at the kind of the movement we're in right now, actually, which is what is it? Processed foods are bad. And when you think about how much processing goes into some of the alternative
Yeah.
meats, you're like, well, is that good for you or not? And so that's been sort of one of the flags being raised. I would also say there
Hmm.
is kind of a resurgence in appreciating, call it dairy and
Mm.
butters and fats and all the good, call it the good things that we were told that were bad. And there was an article in the Washington Post a month ago that was like dairy consumption for the first time ever is on the rise in a long
Wow.
time, right? Because you always
Wow.
have like the almond milks and all this and that kind of going at it, but it's like and so I would say in order to get speed and scale, like we need to ensure that it's like call it the degrowth mentality. I think the degrowth
Hmm.
approach has not worked. It's not working, but
Hmm.
like leaning into the growth, the abundance, the more is like probably the best way to cut through this. It's kind of like I
Hmm.
think why you asked the question around the Carlisle thing. It's like they didn't do it because of the good reasons. They did it because it was making them more secure. And that's also a good reason too. It's probably a better one. It's a more goes down the Maslow hierarchy of needs to
Yeah.
the fundamental one.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And even thinking about climate is such a privilege, right? So many people don't get to think about that. A couple comments just on what you shared. So
Yeah.
we talked about spend and steel, how that's going to take 20 to 30 years, right? And we need to innovate there. And that's one of the categories I'll get into. The other is food. I think that whenever someone talks about starting a company in food or getting into food, I just put the disclaimer, and you can disagree that like there's not a ton of money. Like venture capitalists generally don't love food, especially after the alt protein, but like there's so much that needs to be done in the ag space, and that is such a huge
Yeah.
contributor of emissions. But I haven't seen, like, to my sadness, I guess, right? Like I have not seen an argument to be made for a ton of people going into that space from like an incentives
Oh,
idea or space, even though I wish that there was. And so this is like if I'm giving advice, I'm like, hey, just know
yeah.
that that's a space that I don't see that's super hot, but also we need so much more there. And there's like a lot of nonprofit, a lot of local things that are happening, not as much on the private sector that I can see.
Yeah. I think there's like they call it the hype around alternate proteins like went up
Yeah.
and I mean when I say it's still there like you got all that money went to companies and so I would say
Yeah.
there's a big pressure and a lot of weight on the shoulders of companies that are currently working on cultured meats that are working on alternate proteins like crickets and others and
Yeah.
fungi. It's like the challenge for them will always be like can we convince someone to eat it and if it's better for you they will or they might and so forth. But I think like on the food waste side, you do have a lot of nonprofit energy around helping solve that problem, which is great.
Right.
Then you have companies, and I think someone in the chat might have posted like a composting gardening movement, but then Copia, I think if there's like Mill as well too, Matt
Yeah.
Rogers, like
Hmm.
trying to get at waste diversion and venture capitalists like ourselves are supporting, a company
Yeah.
like that. The beef train on the seaweeds, there's so many companies that are trying to tackle that problem. Like I feel like it's like for the food piece, it was like maybe a realization in the overhyped part of it that, ooh, this is a little bit harder than it looks. And so
Hmm.
but I think you will see investment going towards specific categories of food where, investors and then founders will say, hey, I know how I can take this forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of a kind, carbon steel, like those sort of hard to decarb areas are hard to tackle for mostly like I think financing incentive reasons. I see something similar in food, even
Yeah.
water conservation, those sorts of things. And obviously that means it's obvious that that's where it's lagging, right? Same with carbon removal, where buying for this is voluntary. Um, and so I don't really have a point just to say I see similar things, and it feels like the incentive system, the financial system and kind of what you said about like the next few years, keeping an eye on where the money goes. Do you have any
Yeah.
thoughts?
The thing I might jump into there too, I'm just noticing Adam's comment in the chat, which I think is kind of I think you're right, Adam. Probably a lot of what I'm saying right now is very much about like growth, markets, and all of those forces. And I think the Carlisle piece is kind of hitting at like the security element. It's like, oh, like there's like all of that. But you're right too, where good policy, good values, like can really change, call it more things. Like it's better than selling an EV is getting someone out of their car because public transit's great because there are protected bike lanes that make it safe for you to go from point A to point B. I think like 2 days ago, 3 days, like this week's been a fun week, I guess. Like Paris, like passed, like the voters voted to take back 500
Hmm.
streets for people, pedestrians and bikes. And I think all the critiques that Mayor Hidalgo has gotten, it was like, this is actually the ultimate test. Like, did she give something that people loved, or did she, take things away from folks? And it's clear. So it was like some 60+% voted, or 66 said, yes, we really want this. And I think what's beautiful in that world is it's like good policy is creating place and space that make people feel like they're getting more out of their lives, right? Like a person in Paris isn't taking the street back because they're like, let's do it for the climate. Like they're doing it
Hmm.
because it's like my kids are having a good time. Like I'm able to
Hmm.
bike with them. I'm able to, and so I think like, Adam, part of it is we do need in like nothing can like be more effective sometimes than a stick, but it's really hard to get a stick. But like there's also good policies that just create better communities, better cities, like can push car makers to be more fit. Like I think it's finding that perfect balance. Cause in some ways, like I think in the US, we have to ask ourselves like what works better, carrots or sticks or something in the middle. I mean, like to be quite honest, the prior administration put a lot of carrots. And so it's like there was no stick in the IRA. It was all carrots. Maybe minus the methane tax stick, which kind of
Hmm.
made sense. But
Yeah. And Jessica's comment actually about resilience, investing in resilience. I did want to ask this, and we only have 10 minutes, which is crazy, Ryan. We do this every time
oh
where
my God. Yeah.
there's so many things to talk about. Um, Adaptation, is this a part of what you all are working on, or is speed and scale specific to mitigation?
It's a great question. I think for us as a team, we asked the question on for us, we're focused very much on mitigation, Candice, but
Yeah.
like it is being very clear that anybody that focuses on climate investing can't ignore
Hmm.
what's happening on call it the like I feel like adaptation is such a weak word. It's like this is called survival. Like it's like
Yeah.
there's like things that need to be invested in. And I think you are seeing climate investors put money behind call it wildfire prevention, and
Hmm.
those kinds of ideas and insurance like there's just so for us at least in the KRs it's very much focused on mitigation, but it is top of mind on the adapting piece. And Eric Toon from Breakthrough had a
Hmm.
wonderful kind of point of view on this. He was like, for the longest time adaptation was like really for the nonprofits to think about because it was about like the other parts of the world. And I'm paraphrasing and kind of taking his words and making them on my own a little bit. He was like like other folks are focused on it, but now all of a sudden you have big cities that are very wealthy that need solutions. Like how do you pump out water from when after a flood? How do you do certain things? And so
Hmm.
um, you can't ignore it. It's
Yeah.
unfortunately it's here. And I have a feeling I saw at least in the chat someone asked an insurance question, which we should get to because that's an area
Yes.
where yeah.
Amazing. Okay, cool. One call out was, well, Tailwinds is a great adaptation sort of venture capital, venture firm. Vibrant Data Labs is kind of doing what Speed and Scale is doing in some ways on the philanthropic side. So I don't know if you all are connected to them, but they do a lot of the data quantification
Awesome.
around where
Yeah,
philanthropy is
the link would
going
be
in
great.
climate. It's interesting. Okay, cool. And I can intro you guys later. So if we talk about, God, policy, grassroots
Yeah.
movements, innovation on tech, investment, and we'll call investment right now deploying things at work, right? So project financing. Um, is there any other category that I'm missing there that you would
Uh,
want to go into? I
no,
can
but
say them
that's
again. Okay.
yeah.
So on policy, and I'll try to be quick, we have local, state, US. We love Climate Cabinet, the work that they're doing on that side of
Yes.
things. Um, we have China, and we have other companies trying to become, uh, if they're net importers, probably trying to become energy independent. Is there anything else that you want to say about, let's say, China or other countries
Yeah.
that are ahead of us in some ways in their climate innovation or climate policy?
I mean, this is a global race in a lot of ways, right? There's one
Yeah.
race, which is like who can help show the world that we can do this, right? So I think our message in Speed and Scale has always been it's really up for the US, Europe, and even China
Mm,
to show the world that it is possible.
mm,
And it's sort of this thing where, like, as someone who lives in the Bay Area in the United States, like I have no ability to, give proclamations to someone who's growing up in Africa or in India. But what I can do is I
mm,
can say to this community that we're a part of around here, like, we have to go first because if we are, we get to be the industrial leaders in that area. So there's really an economic incentive. But really, what that ends up doing is it ends up driving down the cost. So for the rest of the world, they get to just really leapfrog us, hopefully. And so,
mhm,
the message I could share to the developing world is always like, don't do things the way that we did because you have such a
mhm,
whole different world of solutions. Like if you are a country looking at, adding and really creating a resilient grid, you might think twice about natural gas, even though, yes, past 20, 30, 40 years, it has been the most, probably call it a very consistent source of energy. But these past 2, 3 years should show you that it's like, oh my
mm,
God, but overnight, you could have a year where prices go up 500%. And can you handle that? And so you may go, oh, okay, we'll do the natural gas stuff, but we got to do solar, wind, and storage. And so I really
mm,
see this as like an opportunity for every country to say, are we going to try to be a part of this future? Are we going to make different decisions to like create our own kinds of grids? And how do we build our cities? Like, you don't have to follow, call it the American model. And,
yeah.
cell phones are always that great example where in some countries there's never a landline because they were like,
Hmm.
let's get the best kind of new thing.
Yeah, it
Um,
reminds me of like it's a decentralized sort of way of doing things, and microgrids are way more popular in places like Africa than they are in the US. And they might have to become more popular in the US for resilience reasons. But that's one note that I would say.
I'm also
Oh,
reminded
go.
of Jonathan, VBL, Vibrant Data Labs. I think our team has spent time with them and they're quite
Great.
amazing. So yeah,
Love
I
it.
just I heard VBL, but I was like, VBL, what does it stand for? Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Grassroots movements, how involved are you there and how much energy do you, I guess you personally, but also Speed and Scale put on grassroots movements? And this is maybe where how are things different right now?
Yeah.
And where do you place your energy today versus a year ago?
I mean, everything starts like you cannot underestimate the power of any grassroots movement. And I think part of
Mm,
this moment actually is if you can't make inroads at the federal level, what can you do at the state? What can
mhm,
you do at the, call it county? What can you do just in your own neighborhood? And I think that's actually,
yeah.
if we were having a call as a team, like how do we lift up these kinds of actions that you can do in your actual and your own city? Because I think part of that is like, no matter what, even if the federal government did and created all the rules and all the good stuff, you still need to like actually act and mobilize at like on the call it on the ground level.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think for activists, I think as a whole, it's always like, what is your action leading to?
Hmm.
Is it, could you take that energy and get some of the big wins in your city to happen? Like, could you take your activist energy and do something disruptive, or do you do it towards like maybe getting the mayor to add more clean energy to the grid and do it in a disruptive way? Like, there's no reason to not disrupt, but it's like when you look at the three big areas of a city where emissions, it's the grid, cars, and then am I forgetting the third? They'll come to me in a sec.
Is it ag or not?
For a city, I'm gonna have to go to our action guide for a sec.
Oh,
Why
for
do
city, yeah.
my brain just took a little hiccup? It is oh, buildings.
Nice.
I was like, something's in a city and it's big. So in that sense, there, it's like, how do you switch to heat pumps and so forth? But like, that's actually
Hmm.
where I think cities were leading the way, and the federal government really, kind of latched onto it. But I think maybe another message for when we think about activism and messaging, it's like we like that sort of like what is it? There's that like you don't touch my gas, guns,
NIMBYism.
and something like where it's just
Mm.
like maybe the messaging for the natural gas bans was the wrong one. right?
Mm.
Like we're rather than saying we're going to stop you from using stoves and X, Y, and Z, like how do you make it one about like, hey, this is a better heating and cooling system and we'll help you with it. Hey, by the
Mhm.
way, like if you want an induction stove, we'll give you, call it a new set of like really good pots and pans that actually work really well. Like I think we
Mhm.
really need to think about like what outcome are we getting for and what's the right way. And I think we like the past 4 years and 8 years really, but really 4 and 2 years, like there's a lot of learning on messaging and what's the right way and how does it not some of our good intentions get hijacked and placed as like a really bad thing.
Yeah, cool. Well, I think we jumped around a ton, and that was
Yeah.
mostly me just being like, let's do everything. I do have just closing questions, 30 seconds each. One is like, what do you spend most of your time thinking about right now, Ryan, that you didn't think about 2 years ago?
Ooh, that's a good question. Two now versus 2 years ago. Ooh, actually, I mean, in an exciting way, it really is like, how do companies get to this next through this
Mm,
next trough, right? Like 2 years
nice.
ago, Candice, like there's so many good companies getting started. So
Hmm.
many. Right? When you look across the ecosystem of venture capital firms, like there's so many doing so many climate, like there are some 2,600 companies that got, a check in the past, call it 4 or 5 years. And so, getting started is one muscle and one kind of activity, but then now sustaining and becoming those like call it the outliers is like is what's the focus is now. And I think for it's like that's kind of an exciting switch in many ways, but I
Hmm.
would say it's an even harder challenge because like to start a company it requires maybe a smaller pool of money to like sustain and grow are the bigger ones. And so I think we find ourselves building a lot more coalitions now. I think you're seeing a lot of everything we all do, climate Vine, could be called like changing the entire way the world works Vine as well too, right? Because, right, these emissions come from every part of, every
Yes.
sector of society. And like because of that, I think that's why so many people are drawn to these solutions that are like coming out of these Series B and C kind of companies. So like, oh, you found a way to get rid of like excessive, fertilizer use. That's cool. Oh, that's like a new kind of storage system. Like a way to produce heat and store it, like the thermal batteries. And so, like, this is a very exciting time because I think all of the optimistic ideas of what could get created, you can actually walk into today, March 2025. You can go walk into any of these companies, see that thermal battery, see a field being deployed of like pivot bios, like like you can see it today. And like that I think is probably maybe the most optimistic thing. Because 5 years ago,
Yeah.
there was no, Rondo thermal battery five years ago. There was no,
Hmm.
um, lithium clean. It's like it's such a cool moment.
Hmm. Absolutely. Okay, cool. The last question we'll ask before you
Yeah.
leave is, what are your exciting projects and what's your ask of the group? But we'll save that for the very end. Who asked about insurance, and can you just go off mute and on video if so I can bring you
That
up?
was
Breen,
me.
great.
Yeah.
Hey, Breen.
You're on mute
Um,
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was me. Sorry, my wife was trying to respond to me too. Uh, she's very important, so she's more, I had to respond to her first,
Of
and
course,
then
always, always, always.
okay, so in the insurance world, um, like I'm seeing more and more insurers starting to wake up. I
Yep.
just read this post from the board, or like one of the board chairs from Allianz about how this is going to infect or like infect, I guess is like maybe a good slip. But the capital markets. There's a guy in my town who he works at CoreLogic and he helps do all the data underwriting for BEMA insurers and banks. And they're just talking about like the rapid increase of physical risk to our real estate markets. And
Yeah.
so it's just been seeming like they're starting to really wake up, raise pricing in really sensitive areas. You're starting to see them consider like new terms on what you have to do to keep your insurance. Like my family, um, like my parents have like live in a place that is like in wildfire area, and so they have to do certain things to keep, the trees away from their
Yeah.
house, and I mean, there's going to be more and more of that. And so I'm just seeing how, or I'm just curious, like you're at a much more elevated level than I am. So I'm curious, like how you're seeing insurers start to rethink how they insure their total portfolio
Mm,
based on what's happening.
yeah.
And like, will that make people move faster if they can't get insurance? You have Jerome Powell talking about mortgage deserts. If you can't get insurance, you're not going to get 30-year mortgages.
Yeah.
You know, so like, and then the questions are like, if that happens, like, how do we adapt? You
Yeah.
know?
Breen, I think we're all living through it in the same
Yeah.
moment, right? And so it's like I think what's kind of crazy is like the insurance companies are all of a sudden the truth tellers of what's happening to the planet, right? Like where they won't cover if you're in a fire risk zone, if you are near a flood zone, if you're near these things that maybe the climate community has been saying, hey, wake up, we have to do something about it. And the insurance companies are becoming that wake up call, but it's almost falling in the category, Candace, going back to the climate, sorry, the Carlisle piece of like energy security versus this. It's like people don't care. They're like, there's a risk. Like my home may get flooded. Like I don't care about the climate. It may get flooded.
Capital destruction.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just exactly. And I spent before coming into climate, so like 10-ish years ago was more in the health space. And the health insurance market has always had the federal government as, not always, sorry, when the ACA got passed, it really had the federal government as kind of like a backstop to help when these really insure everybody, right? I think the unfortunate reality for home insurance is that it's a private market. And so if it becomes risky, an insurer will charge more. And I think what you're seeing in California is, in particular, where we live, it's like the state said to the insurers, well, you can't charge too much, which makes sense. Like, is like you don't want those prices to rise. But because of that, those insurers go, well, we're not going to cover you anymore because we can't make the math work. And now I think the state has always had to step in, and so, Breen, we're living in this little moment right now where do insurance companies raise rates to match the true risk? Do they put sets of requirements on homeowners, like you said, like to your parent, like they have to keep things in a certain state so then they can get lower premiums? Or do states have to start to find a way to pool that risk together and create kind of backstops that help everybody? And it's like depending on where you might fall on the political spectrum, you might pull on a different set of these levers. Let the market do a little bit, let the state do a little bit. But I would say this is a real problem. I think there was like another thread recently on the mortgage pieces. I guess there's lots of buildings that are getting older, and apparently some mortgage firms, like some insurance companies, won't insure them anymore because of the incident that happened in Florida with that building collapsing, right? Because of like
Mhm.
damage, wear and tear. It's like there is this big question, like all at play, unfortunately, with risk in our housing and the places we live. If I could wave a magic wand, it would probably be some mix of all three, where one,
Yeah.
insurance companies are able to charge the appropriate price so they can create that risk pool in business, but that we just have to be smarter about how we build, where we build, how we can also make sure that there is proper like water coming out of fire. Like there's a lot of things that can get done to make homes safer when a crisis happens. And then ultimately saying states and the federal government, like, this is property like of American citizens and people and residents and everybody. And so how are you going to help fill that gap there? And so it's like a really big question, Breen.
Oh, I know. That's what I'm
Yeah.
asking you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Breen. Sorry, Adam, you'll go first, and then David, I'll bring you in after that.
Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you.
Okay, cool. I got a new volume set up, so I don't know what's going on. So the from what I understand in the last report that I saw, Chinese storage and solar are insanely low right now.
Yeah. Good question. It's a good one. There's a good question in the chat.
Uh, and from what I understand, it's both the potential tariffs that are on the plate, but also there's this really strong kind of I don't want to say adversary, but just kind of like we don't know anything about the Chinese market. We don't know anything about manufacturers, plus the constant like middleman. By the time we get the battery or something, we have no idea who the original manufacturer is. And like I know a few people or particularly one person that's working on like a battery passport to solve that problem. But as far as getting the mass supply of like what we desperately need in so many places outside of like Texas, more so, because that's the only place that's actually doing a good job in storage. But how do we get the rest of that over to the US or just generally anywhere and outside of the Chinese market where they're like bleeding batteries right now and solar, really?
Yeah. This is one of those things where if we were optimizing just for cheapest source of energy on the planet, like we would be importing solar and batteries and everything from China at full steam ahead. And that's sort of what the world was doing in many ways till this moment that we're in, where we kind of turned around and said, "Oh my God!" But like, what has happened to our industrial base? What has happened to really domestic manufacturing? In the past 4 years, the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure, like a lot of these things, try to reshore the building of these important things. And like, what's kind of crazy is that American solar manufacturing has like really. I have this chart, but I don't know where it came from, and so I'll find a way for Candice to get it. But it was like basically showing like 5,000 megawatts a quarter being produced in the US in 2021. And then in 2022, it's like still between 5 to 10. The IRA passes. And so in 23, it jumps up from 5 to 15 to then this past year, it jumps up to 40,000 megawatts. And you're like, holy moly, like that is more solar produced in the US than what we've installed in the US. And so, like, the policies that were put in place to bring it back, yes, the solar panels are more expensive. I think you can kind of like divide it by two if you bought the Chinese ones, but like it is really strengthening the base, the people that live here, and doing the right thing. And so I think that's probably the challenge of the moment is that, well, can more of these patterns happen? Can you bring back manufacturing in these key areas? Can it still keep costs low but create good jobs? Like that would be the perfect mix of the two. Because like to the point earlier around the security premium, call it the economy jobs premium there. I think in the US we're willing to pay for it. Like that's what the Inflation Reduction Act did. It like paid money to get these things built here and to subsidize them. But what that means, though, for the world, though, Adam, is because we sort of are buying less, is that those panels are going into all the other places. There's this piece about in Pakistan where, like, uh, there's no data, I think, good data on imports and exports of solar there, but like through some satellite imagery, they started seeing solar panels being put on all these roofs, and they're like, "Wait a second, this is interesting." And then the data comes back. It's like Pakistan is like the sixth biggest country in deploying solar, and that's because it's so cheap. And it's so like life finds a way, that like Jurassic Park moment. And it's like people need energy, and if it's cheap, it'll find. And it is wonderful and beautiful that it's solar and not a fossil fuel that makes them kind of dependent. Long-winded way of answering kind of yes, like if we were to optimize for the world, yes, China, build as much as we can to save the planet because you could probably do it the cheapest. But I think we're optimizing right now for domestic production security, like building back our economy and so forth. And so this is sort of the right place. I think what happens these next 4 years, what this administration chooses to do will be very telling.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Adam. David, I'm going to steal your question because we have 3 minutes left. And so, Ryan, we're going to do a 2-in-1, which is, do you see attention shifting to oceans and
Ooh,
the impact that ecological collapse there could have on global climate? And
yeah.
then at the end of that, tell us about your new projects and what your question is or what your ask is to the group.
Yeah, there's still like it's wild. There's still not like it's like because you can't see what's happening underneath the ocean, you seem to ignore it. I
Yeah.
think we're pulling the data right now for how much more land was protected, how much more oceans were protected year over year. And oceans, I don't think it's actually progressed. And so it's like we're off track from trying to at least preserve some 30% of it, 30 by 30, 50 by 50, right? Like these are all the targets the world has
Hmm.
been kind of aiming for. I would say in the oceans, I think the big lever there that folks can try to pull on is like, and this is where activism is important, is like countries banning certain activities off their shores and also banning like companies that work within their from doing things like deep water trawling. Like the sheer amount of abuse that happens when deep water like it is catastrophic. It's like football size nets that are rolling on the, like, it is just, it's terrible. But so I would say for the person that asked the oceans question, not enough. But I think what the world needs to hear and see is like, what are the real, like, small, like, sorry, the levers to pull on, the right actions. Like, I think people don't know what to stand up for the ocean or how to get a law passed. And it's like, if you mobilize people on those areas, I feel like a lot could happen. Um, what should folks be thinking about? Oh no, it was
Projects.
projects.
Projects and ask. Yeah.
So what was the project part of the question? I haven't asked, but what's the
What
project part?
exciting projects do you guys have coming up that you wanted to share?
We do. So the exciting project that I'll make sure it gets sent in a more detailed email of a note, but we've
Yes.
been working on really looking at the space of technologies out there and
Mhm.
what the state of them are and who is working on them and where's the best research. And we kind of very quickly realized, like, even with our small set of partners, is we can only capture, call it the top of the iceberg. And it's really the bottom of it that, like, can really show others where they need to invest time, what's working and not. And so you'll see a note from us very soon, kind of, or when I say very soon, sometime middle of this year, basically saying, hey, here's this map, and we'd love for people to actively participate. Like, this is a project of ours that is, like, not necessarily sorry, that is and will be 100% open source. Like, I should say, all of our stuff people should use and take and whatnot. But this one in particular is like, can we really make it something that the community is all jointly working on? And so,
Mhm.
it sounds like it's really nerdy. It's like the nerdiest project we're working on,
Right.
but like this community will love it. And so just sit tight, Candace, and we'll definitely be sending it soon.
Is that your ask as well?
That is the ask. The ask is to,
Great.
like, really, like help out, be a part of it, because I feel like everybody on this call in particular, but I think for folks that also are part of the climate bio world, you are going in trenches. Like, talk about the ocean, the person who asked the ocean question. Like, I guarantee you know more about that space, what's possible, what's not. Like, call it on the technology side that
Mhm.
we may miss in our mapping, and it'd be really helpful
Mhm.
to um,
Cool.
yeah.
We
Adam,
we'll send out the email, Adam.
I
We've
promise
got
to
we've
send
got
the
more.
email. It's a voluntary act, but it is. We've got this map, putting it out into the open source, and we'd love help really making sure that all the pieces are there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Ryan,
In the meantime, yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Candace.
thank you so much. Sorry, I just didn't want to. Well, I'm assuming you might have a hard stop, so I wanted to give you the time. If anyone wants to go off mute and say thank you to Adam, sorry, Ryan. He's one of our favorite speakers, and thank you for just
I
continuing
think
to
it
spend
Adam as
time
well
with
too.
us.
But
Yeah, thanks, Adam, too.
everybody, have a wonderful
Bye,
week.
Ryan.
Okay, weekend. It's
Thanks,
coming
Ryan.
soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.